Today's class is taught by the Auto Apps Training and Software Group. We are going to be teaching on the functionality and operation of SmartyCat built into our writer. You'll notice that you have SmartyCat underneath catalogs, and then you have Smarty Order. What we're going to do is start with an invoice. We're going to start with this 2005 Buick, which does have some jobs on it. In this case, you can see that we have parts in red. Parts in red meaning the parts haven't arrived yet. Part of best practices that we teach is, again, using department and invoice number to turn it red so you know when a part has been received. In this case, you have Smart eJobs, and you also have SmartyCat. And wherever you click from an invoice is where you land. So in this case, we're going to keep it real simple. What I'm going to do is just click on Smart eJobs. It's going to open Smart eJobs, and you'll notice we have search, we have categories, and then we have smart job categories. These are the smart jobs you set up. So what's going to be important on the smart jobs is your smart jobs should mimic your regular labor jobs. I'll be talking about this in the setup and operation in a different training class. In this case, when I click on oil changes, what you should have set up is all your different oil changes. That way it's pulling very quickly the correct oil that goes with that oil change, and we can also tie specifications with that oil change. In this case, we're just going to click on 5W30. You'll notice here that we're going to pull oil from our inventory. One thing about setup best practices, I should have oil, 5W30 just to know instantly I'm pulling the 5W30. So again, that's going to be in best practices. You'll notice we're going to be looking up recommended oil, viscosity, engine oil capacity, and the actual oil filter. If you didn't want to look something up, you'll notice down here it says exclude. So if I didn't want to look up recommended engine oil, I could click on it and exclude that. In this case, I'm going to leave it where you can look it up. I'm just simply going to click on go. And what that's going to do is go in and do your lookup, and you can see that the recommended oil is just a standard API oil. So that's all you're doing the lookup for. If it would take in a synthetic, it would tell you synthetic. If I hit next, it's simply looking up the next, what we told it to look up. The recommended viscosity, again, is a 5W30. You also could use a 0W30 depending on where you're located at. If I wanted to have that show up on the invoice or part of the job code, I simply would click it with the check mark, and that's what tells it to put it on or transfer it to the actual invoice itself. If I hit next, what you're going to see is we're going to look at capacity in both liters and in quarts. In this case, we're going to be using quarts. So in this case, again, if I check it, the 4.5 will display on the actual job itself because I started with a job. I go next, and the next thing you're going to notice, it looked up the oil filter. Now, what you'll notice based on best practice is it should be looking up your oil filters that is in your inventory first. So if you have it set up correctly, we know that we have 4 in inventory. So it's going to pull from that inventory item. You'll notice that it's looking at your other vendors. If I needed to order an oil filter or a special type filter that you didn't have, then you could look up that oil filter from a different vendor. In this case, again, I'm going to pull it from my local inventory. I'm going to click next. Now you'll notice in your SmartyCat setup, you had it defaulting at pulling 5. So if you wanted to, you could go ahead and change that to 4.5, and it'll change it to 4.5 when it transfers that invoice. You'll notice you have several options. You have post to the repair order. Again, what our goal teaching the class is that you can look at the screen and you understand which each function is just simply by looking at the screen. So I'm going to cover this in several stages. One, we have it defaulted as posting parts and labor to the oil change 5W30 job. If I wanted to post to existing job, I would click on that. If I want to add it to individual parts and labor, I could do that. And then we have labor options. In this case, we're simply going to take and pick the technician that's doing the oil change. If I hit post and exit, that simply posts it and takes me to the invoice. If I hit post, it posts it to the invoice, but leaves me in SmartyCat Smart Jobs. In this case, I'm simply going to post it to the invoice, and you're going to notice that I have part of the packages. It's a $39.95 based on the oil and the oil filter and labor. So in the setup, you have the option, if you wanted it to default 1050 labor all the time, we could do that. We could, in this case, it's adjusting parts and labor based on the oil, the quantity that you put on hand. So again, looking at Smart Jobs, what I want you to understand is the importance of having Smart Jobs set up correctly and the limitations of what Smart Jobs can do for you versus using the labor categories and using what I call the quick search. So in the case, let's say that we noticed that this needed a water pump. If I went simply to labor, which is not SmartyCat, I haven't sold it yet, so I don't want to put a technician in, so your default shouldn't be to the tech. I'm going to pick the category cooling system, and I'm going to pick on water pump. You notice if you set up your jobs right, you have a smart labor guide that will pop up that's tied to this job in the setup. So it lets you do a quick lookup of a water pump, and you can see the labor time of that water pump is 1.8 of an hour. I can go ahead and post that. You'll notice it transfers that to the build time 1.8. You can notice that we're using smart pricing. So you'll notice that the smart pricing will change that pricing once you post it in. If I click OK, again, that's in the class on the matrix pricing. If you want to see that pricing, I click OK, and it just simply puts that job on that invoice. Again, the reason I wanted to show you this, if I jump to Smarty Jobs or I jump to SmartyCat, it's simply where does it land. So if I click on Smarty Jobs, it lands on Smart Jobs. If I go up and click on SmartyCat up under Catalogs, it will land on looking up based on category. So, and then if I wanted to go to Smart Jobs, again, our goal is you can simply look at everything and know exactly what you can and can't do. This takes me to my shop. This takes me to my job codes. This takes me to my catalog. So in the case of looking up a water pump, if I went to cooling system, now I can look up parts and labor. The difference here is if I double-clicked on the water pump, it's going to also bring up gaskets, fan, and fan clutch. It's going to ask me more information. If it needed more information, it's going to do the lookup based on water pump, liters of cooling system, fan clutches, gaskets, that kind of stuff. So that's when we're looking up through what we call the categories. You'll notice here I can change and say, hey, I just want to look up hoses, and it just looks up your hoses. So this is just simply looking up your radiator hoses and your heater hoses. So you have the ability under categories to be able to change your lookups. If I wanted to look up a labor, I could simply click on cooling system and look up that cooling system labor. If I wanted to just transfer that water pump, I could click on that R&R water pump, as you see here, which I did that quick lookup, 1.8. So there's a place for using smart categories, or in the Smart Jobs categories, both parts and labor, and there's also a place for what I call quick lookup. So in the search, if I were to type water pump and click on find, then that allows me to pull up what I want to search. So I can look up either parts or labor. So if I double clicked on the labor, it's simply going to pull up the labor for that. If I clicked on find again, I could click on water pump and it's simply going to do the lookups based on water pump. So it's not adding the fan clutches and the gaskets and all that. We're simply doing a quick lookup for a water pump. Where that plays out, and let me just take us back so it's clear, is when I have a job already on the invoice and I just simply wanted to do a quick search, I could click on SmartyCat or Smarty Jobs, jump to search, simply type in water pump, click on search or find, and then say I want to look up water pump just real quickly. And then it's going to go to the suppliers that I have set up. It's going to go to my first default supplier. Again, if I want to look at other suppliers, I just hit on the plus key. You'll notice on the water pump, if I have AI here, it's going to look up the picture from Epicor, what we call cover to cover, and give you the information on that water pump. If I was in Napa and I wanted to look up what Napa had, and you can see they have a new water pump for $29. You can see the manufacturer's a TrueFlow. You can see the line code's a TFW. You can see an N here. An N would mean that I actually can go to Napa. In this case, it doesn't have the picture. Normally, you would just change it from top to bottom, and you would see the picture and you can see it's coming actually from the Napa website. So that's when you see the in there. Some of the suppliers have it where you can go to their website, and then others will be just through the Epicor, depending on which setup you have. In this case, we want the water pump. We want the Gates water pump for $19.24. You can see your list price, and you can see your matrix price. So here's a case where your matrix price is lower than the list price. So these are decisions you'll make, and so I'm going to go ahead and post this. What this allows me to do when I go to my posted parts and labor is I have, again, the options to post it to an existing job. So if I wanted to post it to that water pump that I already had on the invoice, I could do that. So once I've done that and hit, again, post and exit, you're going to see it adds that water pump to that water pump job. So what I want to teach in SmartyCat usage and operation is the differences in looking up quick search, looking up smart jobs, and looking up using categories. So let's say in this case I wanted to look up shocks and struts. We have what we call a smart search. So I'm simply going to type in a shock or a strut, and you're going to see that in this case, based on my setup, I'm looking up shock absorbers, and I want to look up labor for shock absorbers. Well, my question is, the problem we're going to run into on this vehicle is it really doesn't have shocks on the front. It has struts. So if I click on go, what you're going to find is it can't find anything, because it truly, it's going to look up shocks. Or in this case, it does have, you're looking up shock absorbers, but in the case if it had struts, it wouldn't bring up the struts itself. Now, what I was going to show you is your ability to, if you wanted to, while you're in a smart job, you also have the ability to be able to jump to and look up the categories themselves. So in this case, I could jump up to shocks and struts. I can double click on that, and I actually, in this smart job, can jump into my categories and do lookups based on the categories. So you're not limited to just the lookup that you had pre-programmed. So let's say I wanted to do the complete strut assembly. I'm simply going to click on next. Now it's looking up. I'm going to go in and look up the labor, and you can see the labor is 2.2 hours. Now what I want you to see here is you can see the description of that labor. So when I go to next, We have the strut assembly. We also, if I click on labor, you can see the front shock or front strut labor. Now, what I wanted to show you here based on this smart job is I have the ability to, looking at the labor, remove and install, you notice we have shock and strut, I have the ability to append the predefined description. So I could append that in, or I could replace it, or I could use a predefined what I'd originally wrote up. In this case, I want to replace the predefined description with the one from the labor guide built from Mitchell built into SmartyCat. So when I post and exit here, what you're going to see is it pulled that description from actually, and then I could go ahead and edit this and say, actually, I want to get rid of shock, and just simply say strut assembly. And again, I'm all about look and feel for that particular customer. I'm simply going to click OK, and you'll notice that now when I look at that invoice for the customer, or I email it out for an approval or that kind of stuff, then you now have the remove and install strut assembly, and you have the job total at the end. So again, this is a custom form. This is one of the custom forms that we create for y'all if you're looking for a custom form that you don't have. So simply we make, like, aesthetics is very, very important to us. So, and your presentation to the customer is important. So again, when you're looking at smart jobs and you're looking at quick lookup, and you're also looking at categories, it becomes important for you to understand, one, have I built all the smart jobs? Are my smart jobs easy to use? So what becomes first when you do your setup, as I'll be talking about in the next class, is do you have all your maintenance jobs set up? And are they priced correctly? Are they quick and easy to use? So in that case, I want to do a coolant system flush. I click on go. I click on post and exit, and it instantly puts that right on the invoice. So again, you want, when using smart jobs, you want speed and use and ease of use. Then you're going to see there's a time when you need to use smart categories, where you're looking up much broader searches, where you're looking up a complete set of not just shocks, not just struts, but you want to make sure you're pulling the complete product line from your supplier. This is why you'll see the lookup takes a little bit longer, but if I just put in strut, I may not be pulling up the full strut assembly, or I may not be pulling up the full strut kits. So there's a place for categories. I want you to be able to see how easily it is to move around in these categories when you want to look up individually by categories, and then also being able to do just a very quick search just on one particular part or one particular labor item that makes it real quickly just to look up that. So with smart jobs, with SmartyCat, it becomes really important in setting up your smart jobs, understanding your lookups, and understanding your quick lookup.